we started using Teams, and so now I'm a little bit rusty. Okay, now let me try and share my screen again. Okay, there you go. All right, cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about when you delegate today, and it's a great question. I think Nick, I saw Nick on. Nick suggested that as a topic, and I thought it was a great topic. I have not talked about that, I don't think, on my podcast yet. Um, I mentioned I did do an episode about when you hire your first employee, and I talked a little bit about some signs or some signals that it might be time to hire your first employee. And so we can maybe we can talk about that down here on number three. It, your first employee is tough as a small business because there's a lot of things that come with the first employee. I don't know how to explain that. There's there's some fixed costs that come with an employee, your first employee. So the first employee is it's a fairly big jump, and after that, it's easy. It's easy. It's much easier after your first employee. The second employee is way easier than the first employee because you got to set up payroll and get an HR manual and do some other things. So there's some upfront stuff to your first employee. But after the first employee, it gets way easier. And what I would tell you is, it gets too easy. So it's very easy to overhire. The first couple of years, I had the tendency to overhire. Um, So it's probably good that there's some upfront fixed cost to that first employee because that slows you down a little bit. So, anyways, that's not what we're talking about today, but I just wanted to mention that there is an episode on that topic. So we're going to assume for the purposes of today's conversation that you have some employees and um, you're trying to figure out what to delegate to those employees. So we'll go with that assumption. So let me tell you about I always like to start with a little story. So let me tell you guys a short story about a friend of mine. I don't think he'll mind. I don't think he'll mind me telling you the story. Well, he'll remain anonymous, but this is a true story. It's a friend of mine. He's a land surveyor. So let me tell you this little story, and then we can get into the first question. So I got a friend of mine. He owns his own company. He's for longer than me, probably twice as long, so probably 10 years. He's been kind of running his own show, maybe 8 years. And he's a good surveyor. I like him. He's a friend of mine. I think he does good work. He does mostly construction surveying. He does a little bit of topo boundary, and he runs a solo shop, and he has for forever, for a long, long time. So he does a little work for me occasionally as a sub. So we'll put him on as a sub consultant when we're running behind. He'll pinch hit for us. You can come in and he'll do field work for me. He doesn't like the office work as much, but if anytime I got field work, he'll do field work for me. And so I was talking to him. I think he had done some work for us, and I was kind of bugging him. I'm like, "Where's your bill? Like, I need your bill. Get me your bill so I can get you paid for that work you did." And he's like, "Oh man, I'm so far behind on my billing." And my wife had just taken an early retirement. She took a medical retirement from her regular career. And I said, "Hey, why don't I send my wife over there to help you out for a couple days?" I was like, "You don't have to pay her. Like, let me just, he's a friend of mine. I'm like, she wants to get out of the house. Like, let me send her over there and just she can help you. Maybe get a little caught up on your billing and get you set up, with a billing spreadsheet or whatever." And so he's like, "Oh yeah, that'd be great. Don't worry about it. I'll pay her. Send her over." So I sent her over there for a couple days, and she started digging into his files and stuff. And she comes home after the first day and she tells me he has like bills for thousands of dollars that like have sat for a year. Like he had a $10,000 bill that had sat for a year, like had never made it to the client. He was just that far behind. And for those of you that don't run your own business yet, like the odds of you getting a $10,000 bill paid after a year, like that's pretty low. So typically after 90 days, the payment rate drops off pretty significantly. So a lot of this was what we call bad money in the business. He was never going to get paid for it. So, anyways, my wife was over there for a few days, and she came back, and he wanted to pay her, and I told him, "Don't worry about it. Like, sounds like you needed her help more than I did. Don't worry about it. You're a friend." And I told him, I was like, "Hey, this is a sign that you probably need to hire some. You need to hire an admin." buddy. Like I'm your friend. Like it's time. Like you're losing more money. You're losing, 10x in bills that never get paid. You're losing 10 times more on that than you are the cost of a. I was like, you don't have to hire somebody full time. Get somebody in a couple days a week. And he would not do it. That was 5 years ago. He still does not have an admin. He's just, I like that. I know I got another friend, good surveyor, a good boundary surveyor, just like that guy. Like, doesn't have an admin. Like, he does all of it. He does the field work, he does the drafting, he does the billing. And I'm not saying that you can't run that model. But I never wanted to run that model, and there's some disadvantages. There's definitely some disadvantages to it. So, anyways, there you go. There's a story. I got a friend of mine. He's probably still a year behind on his billing because he never got it. He did finally hire some contract drafting help. So he gets somebody to help him with drafting like on a contract basis. So he finally did that. Any of you other guys like raise your hand on Zoom if you know a surveyor like that. Like, do you have a surveyor like that in your circle? Who no? Tucker says no. Good. You got a good circle, Tucker. Like I have like two or three of those guys. So, anyways, they're good friends of mine, but man, that's when you're doing everything on your own, that's tough. And we can talk about that a little bit down on opportunity costs. Okay, so my first question here is why is it important for a business owner or an organization leader? So you could be a department head at an agency or utility. Why is it important to delegate? So does anybody want to take a stab at that? It's okay. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but in honor of Kyle Brook, does anybody want to share with me why they? Nick, you got a thought on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just started my business. I've been going at it for a year now. So I'm that guy that's doing everything. And I'll admit that
Awesome.
I do get behind. But I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to why are you in that spot in the beginning? Why are you doing what you're doing? So if you started your business to be a land surveyor, you're probably not a good admin. Just guessing. You're not
Yeah,
a good. You're not a. Or are you a good business person and maybe you have somebody else that's a good surveyor? It could go both ways, but
sure.
it's really hard to wear all of those hats and remain hyper focused on your goals and where you want to be.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment, Nick. Thank you. Yeah, in fact, I'm gonna add that to the notes here. Yeah, so one of the things I've learned uh, is, I consider myself to be a pretty good surveyor. I enjoy it and I take pride in it. I am not the world's greatest admin or office manager. Like, I'm not. Um, and it took me a little while to figure some of that out because, I just, my wife tells me I'm a proud man, like I just assume I'm going to be great at everything. It turns out not so good at some stuff. Um, and you know what helped me to realize that is, I've hired a couple people that are really, really good at their job, like not surveying. Like, um, I just hired a young lady about 4 months ago to come in and help me with some marketing and just like some project coordination. And she's been helping my wife out now with some HR stuff. And like if she's not the best person I've hired in 5 years, she's probably number two. Like she's just amazing. Like she comes from an immigrant family and was working in the family bakery and like putting herself through college. And she's just like she is the hardest working person one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. And she's just like meticulous attention to detail on the ball. Like there's no way I would be doing as good of a job as she does. She does a fantastic job. And I don't mind sharing with you guys like she makes in the mid, in the mid 20s, so between 25 and $30 an hour. And she was like tickled pink to get a job with me, right? Like she was working at the bakery. I think she had a second job as a bank teller. Like she's a hustler. Um, she was making like $18 an hour at the bank. And like she was just thrilled to come to work for me for the mid 20s, be able to apply her degree, and she does a great job. So, some of that you don't necessarily understand how bad you are at some stuff until you hire a person that's actually good at it, and then you're like, Man, yeah, I'm not very good at that. The other thing, you guys, if you listen to the podcast, you've heard me say, I've got a young lady now that's worked for me for 6 years. So she worked for me a year at a previous employer before she came to work at RH. And she's been my main drafter for that time. She's learning how to do a little bit of project management now. She's resolving some boundaries and doing some project management now. But um, there's a couple times where they don't let it happen very often now, but every once in a while, I occasionally will sneak in and do some CAD work. Um, and whenever this young lady gets a hold of my work product, she always makes a face. Like, she's not even consciously, I don't think she even realizes she does it, right? But she gets this like funny, semi-disgusted look on her face because like I don't do as good of a job as her on the finished drafting. I just don't. Like she does a way better job, right? And so my partner Brian's always telling me like, "Why are you finished drafting? Like your stuff is ugly. You have people to do that. Like knock it off, right?" And so yeah, so that's a good, and one of the things that might be a little bit different for me than for somebody like Nick is I started the business and one of the reasons I started a business is because I jumped to some different jobs and I had a kind of like a core group of people that were going with me job to job. And so when I started RH, I told a couple of those people, my first two employees, I told them like, don't quit. I'm not ready yet. Don't quit. Like, give me 6 months to get on my feet. And like they couldn't help themselves. Both of them within the first 90 days, like quit and then called me and was like, I hope you have a job. So it's just kind of how it panned out. So I didn't really get as much time as I wanted to get ready. And part of that's part of the reason why we had a tough first year is because I was carrying some payroll. I was carrying payroll earlier than I thought. So Nick, I'm not pressuring you, man. Like the other side is like having a payroll that you have to make too. So let me just make one note here.
Just to add on to that, a good friend of mine, he's in the geospatial business, I guess, more on the GIS side. But I guess something that kind of put it into perspective for me is, I mean, he started his company, it was just him and maybe one or two employees, and now he's grown it into a multi-million-dollar business. But I mean, he'll admit now that he is a bigger liability in some of those tasks than he is. I mean, he's a rock star at it. He can go in there and do
Sure.
whatever GIS related stuff, but he tells me now that he's a bigger liability than he than he is
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, no, absolutely. You get out of practice. Sure. Yeah. One of the things I think about Nick that's related, and then we'll jump to the next question is, I really like to do field work. I became a land surveyor because I wanted to be outside. I like working outside. And then, I that lasted about 2 years, and then the next 15 years of my career, I was chained to a computer. So when I started my own business, I was like, this is fantastic. I get to be outside. And one of the things I've realized is I spent a week in the Sierra Nevada mountains earlier this spring by myself, working out a cell phone range just because I wanted to be outside and we needed to get some things done. And that's just how things worked out. And at some point, I got to talking to my partner and he's like, you don't realize it, but like you're walking around in the wilderness with the company's most valuable asset. And I'm like, what's that? He's like, it's your license. Because we only have one license here right now. And like, yeah, like if I bleed out on the side of a mountain, like 17 people are unemployed. We're trying to do some things. We're trying to do some things so that doesn't happen. But yeah, so talking about the biggest liability, like yeah, you probably don't want your LS bleeding out because he was doing something dumb in the woods, right? So yeah, yeah, you got to think about that. I'm gonna put that on here. Um, so yeah, that's a great comment. All right, so the second question is which type of task do you delegate first? And I don't know that I have a good answer to that. So it's like, do you delegate the admin stuff first, or do you delegate the drafting stuff first? So I don't know, Nick. You're starting out. When you get your first employee, what are you going to delegate first? Have you decided?
It'll probably be the admin side. I
Okay.
feel like my current workload and everything, I can handle the surveying and the drafting side, but it'll probably definitely be the admin side of things.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not sure how typical that is. I mean, I know Nick's on. I don't know if he wants to chime in there. Nick, do you mind chiming in? Did you delegate admin stuff first, or kind of entry level technical tasks first? I'm not sure if you can.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I guess I got the mic working then. I was trying to stream this, but it wouldn't pipe in the audio from this into the other stream. So here I am. You got my full attention. Anyways, I started off the first year all by myself doing everything. And then the second year, I actually hired a surveyor who was licensed in another state, who owned their own business previously and was basically a hired gun. He had some of his own equipment. And so I cut him loose after spending about 3 months with him in the field, working closely. I cut him loose on doing a lot of solo surveying. And so that got me in the office more than being in the field because I was writing estimates, I was researching these jobs, I was doing all the drafting. And that wasn't very enjoyable for me. I realized, hey, I'm sitting in this chair. I'm not out doing the thing that I love, in the hopes of making more money and growing a business. And then at some point, he found a different opportunity, and I hired a guy who was completely green and thought, you know what, I'm just going to grow my own here and and train him to be office and field both. And then the other guy came back. Well, interestingly enough, together they're cranking out too much field work, more excuse me, more than I can handle on my own, in the office. So I had to make an adjustment there. And now I'm at a spot where I got two younger guys that are both training to do field and office. And then I'm setting up my schedule such that I can take one of them to the field on a Tuesday and the other one to the field on a Thursday, do a survey, get the field mentoring, and then come back and then have them sit in the same office and draw the survey up under my guidance. And not saying that's the only way. That's the way I've chosen to do it right now. And that's with no admin people, which has its downsides. But for me, what it is kind of working backwards from where do I want to be? Well, if I'm going to build something valuable that hopefully at some point I can sell, then I need to make sure that if I walk away from it, that it's valuable to somebody else. And then, another way to hedge your exit strategy is have built-in buyers for your business. So I figure the idea of mentoring some younger folk to licensure, giving them some equity, and eventually exiting, using them as exit liquidity, for a very sterile way to put it, um, is not a bad idea. And it's infinitely easier than saying, "Oh, surprise, I'm retiring. Hey, do you guys want to buy it?" No. Oh, what do we do?
Yeah, that's a horrible situation. Yeah, Nick, I put that down as a future topic. That's great. We should talk about that. That's fantastic. Okay, so that was a great comment, Nick. So Nick like me, Nickel, I started with two technical people, just because that's how it just worked out. That wasn't deliberate. And I would say it was probably a couple years before I had my first administrative person. And that was my wife. And I can't remember. I suspect I made her work for free for a while. Because you can do that with your wife. Don't try that with your other employees. I don't even recommend you try it with your wife either, actually. But I think that's what we did for a little bit. Um, and I will tell you that, looking back in hindsight, for what it's worth, um, if I had to do it over, I would probably start sooner with some admin help, I think. Now that's hard to do when you're starting a business, because you're just, man, you just want people that you can build to the client, and I understand that. And I think looking back, I probably cost myself some money because I was so afraid to add my first non-billable person. And if I had to do it over now, I would probably do that differently. So I've gotten better about it. I to defend myself a little bit, I think that's a problem in the A&E industry. I remember working at past companies that were very, you know, I mean, they would starve the business of admin help. And I at some point that's just a really stupid business decision. Now, look, it can be taken to the extreme. Your Rodman doesn't need a personal admin assistant either. So there's a balance there. But I think probably as surveyors, we tend to wait too long to put on the administrative help. Um, and I've gotten more willing to do that. And I've even called some other people in the business and just said, hey, what's your ratio of admin people to billable people? And just ask, like, is it for every, let's say you got 10 technical people, like how many admin people do you need? Is it one? Is it three? Is it five? I mean, I don't mind sharing. Every company's different, but like I don't mind sharing this with you. Like we're somewhere between 15 and 20 people, depending on the season. I've got 2.5 admin people. And I feel like that's probably, if I had 1.5, it would hurt. Like I don't know that I'm overstaffed. So, I almost feel like that 1 to 1.5 per 10 is maybe a reasonable, it could be as high as 2 to 10, depending on, you know, I'll tell you, I think our administrative burden here is probably lower than a lot of the other places I've worked. And some of that is just we do mostly lump sum billing, which means the billing is just easier. Where I'm not going through a bunch of time sheets and the billing is way easier. We have our team is still fairly small. We all work mostly in the same building. I mean, there's a lot of things that can probably drive that required admin ratio higher, depending on the type of business you have. So yeah, so we probably wait too long. Um, but so I didn't fully think this through until we started talking. But like, so here's where it's tough. Like you're between 5 to 10 people. Like you got to start probably thinking about your first admin employee. But like that's tough, right? Because if you hire too soon, now you've got somebody that's maybe sitting around, and you don't want to do that. But like if you wait till you have a full-time job for that person, like you're doing 80 hours a week at some point. So like there's a balance there. Like you probably don't want to wait till you can put a full-time admin to work. Like that probably means you've waited too long. So you got to think about like kind of how, and that's why for me, my wife was nice because like if I had 12 hours of work this week and 25 hours of work the next week, it wasn't a big deal. And by the way, you can look for a person like that. Like, not every person on the job market is like, I gotta have 40 hours a week. Like, you can find people that are okay with 12 hours one week and 25 the next week. A lot of people are they're okay with that. And so, you got to be honest with people. Like, don't hire them for 40 and then give them variable hours. But especially on the admin side, I think you're going to find that your potential job takers there's a lot more flexibility on the admin side, I think. So one other thing I'll mention here too, if that commitment is a little bit scary, I don't know if you guys have ever used the site called Upwork, but it's a cool contract. It's a site where you can just go contract with folks, and there's some good protections for both sides of the deal there. And you can review people can review you as an employer, and you can review them as a contract employee. And there's a ton of really very qualified administrative help that's it's basically on demand. And so that's a great potential solution. That's actually how we found our IT guy and our first CPA. Is I just hired him contract on Upwork, and then like my IT guy started that way, and then we got big enough now that I just have we send him $2,000 a month, and he's our IT guy. But when it started, I didn't need that all the time, right? Like it just a couple times a month, I needed some IT help, and he'd jump on and help me and bill me per the hour, and it worked out good. So
Hey, can I ask you guys about estimates and who you're having prepare those and what goes into that?
yeah, that's a great question. Nick, let me answer you, and then I'll let the other guys chime in. So there are some critical tasks that I have not yet delegated, even 5 years in, and scope of services and fee estimates are two of those things. Um, Now us other than my partner does estimates for his work, but he's a 25 year veteran. I have just started teaching my most experienced employee how to do simple proposals, scopes and fee estimates. And like she was working on one today, but like we always sit together and do the fee estimate. And the main reason we do that is because there's just so much financial risk there. Um, I don't know. I'm hesitating because I'm keeping too much control on. I can't rule out the possibility that I need to let go of that a little. But I have hung on to that, Nick. But I'm there's full recognition here that probably. I mean, I'll just give you a rule of thumb, and this is different for every company, but for where we're at now in our life phase of the life cycle, like if the proposal is less than 20K, I probably need to be delegating that. Right. I need to be working on proposals that are $20,000 plus. It's probably time for my LSIT to start handling smaller proposals. Um, and so we're my guess is she's gonna do that with me for another. I mean, we just started 3 months ago. Like my guess is she's got 18 months of that with me before I'm ready to just like let her go do it. And I suspect we're gonna have a couple small jobs that go a little over budget when I cut her when I cut her loose, like because that's part of how you learn. So anyways, there you go, Nick. I haven't let go of that yet.
Very cool.
Yeah, so
Anybody else have anything to add on that?
no. I'm curious. Most of the places I've worked, Nick, that's typically a higher level person that's doing that. That has been my experience. I mean, I don't know that it
Same.
needs to be, but
Same.
one of the things
Everywhere I've been, that's been the case. And as an LSIT, it was quite rare for me to get included in the discussion of estimating the fees. Interestingly enough, when I hired this completely green guy 7 months ago, one of the first things that I got him involved with was doing estimates. And it wasn't like, hey, I want you to do estimates for me. It was, hey, there's a handful of things that need to go into these estimates. And the first thing that we're doing is research. We're doing title research and we're researching the survey record. And then in my estimates, I also have a standardized set of 5 screenshots that I want that I include in every estimate. Things like a marked up tax map, a visual scope, drawn scope of the project, the deed, those sort of things, driving time. And so those go out on every estimate. And it's all standardized. So I was able to quickly train him. This is the what I need for all the estimates. And so after that, then he started going in. I'd just give him an address and say, hey, this is what the customer needs. It's find the west line for a fence. It's do a property line adjustment. We do a lot of residential boundary, and so he learned to research in the various counties that we worked and pull the surveys plats, get the deed, and get all the screenshots. And so then I found that for writing estimates, I could just go into my software and say, hey, new customer, new estimate, and drag and drop these screenshots, fill in my template for the rest of the stuff and hit send. And I could get an estimate out in under 10 minutes with, completely under my control. And what I noticed is that through this process, he just got really good at researching surveys, especially, and figuring out, it's so funny with survey research and what I tell him, it's this weird balance and it just takes experience of figuring out there's all these GIS dots on the map. Which ones am I going to click in which order, right?
sure.
Because we're going to waste our time. So figuring out what is important, what should I download and save to the project file, and what should I not. And what I found is that through that process, just like your idea of the various circles and how we're figuring out what is our controlling elements for this boundary survey and expanding outward, um, he quickly started grasping those concepts. And I don't know, it's been interesting trying to tip that model on its head and see how it goes.
No, I think that's great, Nick. That's awesome. So I'm not doing as good a job as you, which is great. That'll be one great thing about this group is I'll find some areas I can improve on. One thing that I think we do a better job on than some other places I've worked, Nick, so we're not where you're at yet with this particular employee, but so everybody that works for me has access to the scope of services and the fee estimate for the job. And I don't know how many of them ever read it, but it's there. We actually keep it in the job folder where everybody can get to it. And when I try and remember when people have a question, like do I need to do this or how much time do I have to do X? I can send them to the scope and the fee estimate, just because I'm just trying to create awareness there. Um, we occasionally have project kickoff meetings. We don't do as good. We don't do as good at that as we should. But when we do have a project kickoff meeting, that is an item on the checklist. Like, did you go over the scope and the fee estimate with the team? Um, but I think we could definitely be more deliberate. And I love the idea of using that as an opportunity to teach people a little bit of boundary research. I think that's great. So I do have a couple people that are being trained to do boundary research. And so no, I think that's great. I think for a long, long time in my own career, that stuff was kind of kept behind a wall. The scopes and the fee estimates, and I don't know why that was, but at more than one place, like, and I even have younger friends in the industry that are like my boss won't let me see the scope. I just don't understand. What I don't understand what the logic is there. I don't know if it's a control thing. I just don't get it.
I'll tell you what, if you're paying your employees decent wages, it's easier to share that info.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what a great tool to help your people understand, what are some of the business decisions, why are you making some of the decisions that you're making, and so yeah, no, I think that's awesome that you've got him involved in that. If nothing else, I think it's going to make him more aware of how much time he's spending on tasks, right? So I think that's, I mean, I don't know how many places I've worked where like the crew goes out and there's just like there's no awareness of like what the budget is or what the scope is, and I we
And they
could
didn't even know to call the customer and let them know they were coming out, right? We
right,
just we
right.
just do what we want. We're surveyors.
Yeah, no. So, and I was hesitating a little bit there because I'm thinking about all the room we have to improve. I think we have room to improve on just making our folks continually go back to that scope of services and fee estimate to answer their questions, right? Because another thing that I've learned, part of what I've learned doing some expert witness work and working with some other surveyors that do expert witness work is like, those contract docs become really important when there's a lawsuit. So that's where your people should be going to answer those questions, right? I'm not saying there's never a time when you do something out of scope for business reasons or because you want to be generous, but like you definitely don't want to tell your client you're going to do something in your scope and then not do it because people didn't read the scope. Like that's an issue. That's a huge problem. So that was great. Nick, you'll have to let us know. You'll have to let us know how that goes. Okay, we're gonna run out of time. I want to get to this last question, this question number 3, and then maybe we'll talk about opportunity costs on a different session. But so how do you guys know when you need to this is for Nick J. How does Nick J know when it's time to start delegating? What are some signs? Do you guys have any thoughts?
I think it just goes back to my initial question. Why did you start your business? What are you good at? Where do you need to be focused at? Are you making money doing admin tasks, or are you making money getting surveys out the door,
Yeah.
basically? So
Nope, that's great. I think that's great. My partner has something he tells me all the time. He says Landon should not be doing $500 tasks. He says Landon shouldn't even be doing $5,000 tasks. Like we're at the point now in our business where Landon better be doing a $50,000 task. And so he tells me that a lot because I have the habit. I love everything, and I just want to be involved in all of it. And he's like, yeah, bro, like you need to be taking down the next $80,000 proposal, not, drafting a corner record, for everybody's sake, right? Like for my sake and for the employee's sake. And so I try and remember that little tagline, right? Like when I'm about to do something, I ask myself, like, is this a $500 task, a $5,000 task, or a $50,000 task? Um, and so that helps me. Here's the other thing that I would tell you. One of the things that I try and monitor is like, how much sleep are you getting? And that really helps me, especially as a business owner, because at some point, if you're not getting enough sleep, it's not sustainable. And there have been a lot of times in the last 5 years here where I have not I've not gotten enough sleep, and at some point, what that tells me is there's a problem. Um, at a minimum, you need to be getting enough sleep, and then hopefully you're seeing your family 3 nights a week for dinner. If you like your family, I don't know. I try, I'm pretty good. 4 nights out of 7, I'm seeing my wife for dinner, I hope. Um, so now maybe you don't like your wife, and so you don't mind working late, doing your bills in the evening or whatever. But most of us aren't like that. Most of us. So that to me, that's a helpful gauge for me. Um, as a business owner, how am I doing on my current work-life balance? Now I'll tell you, like, I work a lot. I'm sure you guys work a lot too. Like, I don't know, my typical week is probably 60 hours. Occasionally in the winter I get a 50-hour week, which is nice. Um, that's still a better life than I had working for some large survey civil firms. I mean, for the 5 years before I started my business, I was working 70 to 80 hours a week. So one of the things I've been able to do as a business owner is, I drop 20 hours a week off my schedule, which is a huge difference, right? And so part of what I'm always trying to evaluate is, am I at the point where hiring a $25 an hour employee means I get 8 hours of sleep every night of the week? Because at some point it is worth that trade, right? If the business is doing okay. Now, look, we have a couple times in the last 5 years where we were starving. Like I started I started like 2 months before COVID, like a year into COVID, we were starving. Like I thought I was going to go stack produce at a grocery store. Like we just, like, okay, I might be a little sleep deprived during that phase, right? Like, but the alternative is not very attractive, right? But like, if we had a good year last year. We did over $1 million worth of business. Like, look, if we're doing $1 million worth of business or more, like Landon Blake should be getting 8 hours of sleep every night, right? And my partner should be too. Like my partner Brian should be getting 8 hours of sleep every night. So, but I like Nick J's. Yeah, why did you start your business? Yeah, I didn't start my business to do bills. Like I just my billing person, our bookkeeper is on she's off today, and like I had to do a bill. And like I was super grumpy about it. Like I had to do a bill and then I did the bill wrong. The client was like, "Hey, you need to fix a couple typos on your bill." And I'm like, right? So yeah, that's a good thing. All right, cool. I'll tell you what, I told Kyle we would talk about minor subdivisions next Tuesday. Like, how can you make those profitable? Because he's doing some of that work, and we do a fair amount of it. So in California, we have if it's 5 lots or if it's 4 lots or fewer. If you're creating 4 lots or fewer, we call it a parcel map or a minor sub, and we do a lot of that. We don't do very much large subdivision work. And so most surveyors I know lose money at minor subdivisions. And there's some reasons for that. And so Kyle was like, "Hey, that was great that you did that topic on like how to determine if a job's profitable." But he's like, "I'm not doing anything near that size. Like, could you do something a little smaller?" So we'll talk about minor subs next week, and then we'll get back to opportunity costs. So, all right, we did a little better. We had some more feedback today, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. That will make it more enjoyable for everybody. And I'll let Kyle know he's totally fired for not being here when I had all these questions for him to answer, but that's okay. We'll catch him next time. So, all right, guys, 6:15. I'm going to sign off. Thank you for jumping on. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys in a week, huh?
Thanks,
See you.
Landon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep,
All right, good
thank you.
night.
Good night.